All right, it's 2 p.m. Shall we begin, Ambassador?
I'm fine.
All right. Okay, so we'll be live in 3, 2, 1. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our third FPCI Ambassadorial Lecture in cooperation with the Delegation of the European Union to Indonesia. FPCI is proud to host this series in which today we have here with us His Excellency Ambassador Vincent Piket, Ambassador of the European Union to Indonesia. Welcome, Ambassador.
Thank you.
So throughout this past month, we've had our first and second ambassadorial lecture in Jakarta and Malang, respectively. And today we are joined by students from Yogyakarta, namely Universitas Gadjah Mada, UPN Veteran Yogyakarta, Universitas Islam Indonesia, and Universitas Muhammadiyah Yogyakarta. Welcome, everybody, and thank you to our FPCI chapters for tuning in. And I would also like to welcome everybody who is watching on YouTube Live. Thank you for joining. I believe it's quite a rare opportunity for there to be a platform that is able to bridge the gap between students and ambassadors. And this is why we're here today. So I'm certain that we'll have a very interesting and insightful discussion today. My name is Cindy, and I will be the moderator for today's event. Ladies and gentlemen, this ambassadorial lecture series aims to discuss various aspects of the bilateral relations between Indonesia and the European Union, especially during the unprecedented time of the COVID-19 pandemic. Today, our topic of discussion will be an update on Europe during the COVID-19 pandemic. So don't forget to share your moments with us from this dialogue by tagging at FPC Indo and at uni_Eropa on your social media posts. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let us now begin today's discussion. So may I invite His Excellency, Ambassador Vincent Piket. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Cindy, for your introduction, and thank you to FPCI for giving me the floor once again in this series of lectures that I have been able to give and very honored to give to university students in different places in Indonesia. We started in Jakarta, then we went to Malang, and now we are in Yogyakarta, a wonderful city in the southern part of Java, which I've been very pleased to visit already a few times. Not yet enough, I must say. I want to come back, and for work, of course, in the first place, but certainly also to enjoy the wonderful culture and heritage that the city and the region boasts. I'm very happy to meet with 4 different universities today. Cindy has mentioned them. Universities with all the very beautiful names. It's very striking in Indonesia in general, but particularly today. And I've met 2 of the universities already. Sorry, 1, Universitas Gadjah Mada. I've been in contact with several professors there. I expect to be visiting, hopefully, it all goes well, the UPN Veteran Yogyakarta later in the year, and but I look forward to also visiting the universities Muhammadiyah, Yogyakarta, and Universitas Islam Indonesia in Yogyakarta. I've been in Indonesia now for a good 10 months. It's been a very fascinating time for me. First of all, being new in a posting in a country like this is an excitement in itself. Discovery of the government, the politics, the society, and the country as a whole. Been able to do some traveling on Java island, of course, but also to Sumatra, even up to Aceh, as well as to Bali, of course, where many conferences and meetings happen, but also to Sulawesi, particularly North Sulawesi, where a very small province, but where with a world-class treasure of corals, and in that province and neighboring provinces in Malacca, we are funding activities to help sustainable use of the maritime environment, bringing income and livelihood to the fishing villages, at the same time preserving the fantastic natural beauty there. The EU delegation in Indonesia, based in Jakarta, is a special one because we have it's one diplomatic mission, but it has two ambassadors. I myself am accredited to Indonesia, as well as on a non-resident basis to Brunei Darussalam. But we have a second ambassador, and that's the EU's ambassador to ASEAN, who, of course, works a lot with the ASEAN Secretariat, besides reaching out to the representatives of the ASEAN countries based in Jakarta here, the COREPER of ASEAN, and also he has a lot of dealings with the governments in the respective countries. So one delegation, one diplomatic mission with two ambassadors is what characterizes us. We have about 60 staff. 1/3 is expatriates like myself, coming from Europe, and the other 2/3 are local staff colleagues dealing with all topics in the relations with Indonesia, ASEAN, and Brunei, from the political side to the economy and trade, but also a lot of the work on managing the cooperation programs that my delegation runs for Indonesia as well as ASEAN. Very important always to understand our very close links as EU delegation representing the EU, very close links with the embassies of the member states of the European Union based in Jakarta. There are 20 EU member states here, a very large number, good number, critical mass, and together we run a very, I think, tight network of coordination on information sharing, on position analysis, assessments, and so on. In the EU group, and at all levels, the ambassadors, including myself, the political councillors, the economy and trade councillors, consular, very important. We have a cultural group, and so a very, very complete set of interactions with between the EU delegation as well as and the member states. Lastly, I should mention that another important resource for my work, for our work, that is the European Chamber of Commerce and the bilateral chambers of commerce of individual, some but not all individual member states. Together they represent about 1,400 European firms based in Indonesia, so no small number, and especially not small if you look at their employment, the employment that they create here in this country for Indonesians. Very few Europeans there, but the large majority of their employees is Indonesians, and there's 1.1 million jobs in European firms here in Indonesia. So a very, very significant business and also economic presence. Now, what keeps us busy at the moment? Now, I think Cindy has put it very, very clearly. COVID is on our minds from the beginning of the day until the end, and not just the working week, but also, of course, during the weekends. It's something that necessitates continuous attention in all respects. That goes for Indonesia, that goes for everybody, including Europe, and which is what I'll be talking about this afternoon. With some information, some snapshots, and some views on how Europe is coping, and how we see the way forward on our continent, but also how we relate to the international community, and that very prominently, of course, Indonesia. If you look at the pandemic, then you can be very straightforward about it. The pandemic is still accelerating globally. That is a fact. The figures show it. With almost every day, another new peak, another new record in the number of infections, and yesterday also a record in the number of deaths globally. So a very, very worrying situation. And it is not over yet. We can anticipate that in a number of places around the globe, this will continue, with particularly now also Africa being part of the risk trend. Africa had been seemed to have been fairly isolated from the large infection trends that other continents have seen, but there is now a very clear pickup in that trends in various places across the continent, and so that is of course quite worrying. From Europe, I can bring a little bit of good news, or relatively good news, and that is to say that the EU countries, but also the wider EU and economic area group of countries, including the UK as not a member state, but still a country with which the EU is linked this year through the transition agreement. The EU has gone beyond the peak, and we have seen a marked decline in the number of daily infections in our countries. Our peak was in April, when we had the highest rate was 35,000 infections on the 8th of April. Now we stand at a much lower 5,000 infections, more or less, in all across the European space. So that is good news. There's only one European country in the top 10 most affected list of countries, and that is the UK on the rank 9th. So that, I think, shows you that the EU, from being at the top of the list in terms of infections, has made tremendous progress in bringing down the peak. Now, this doesn't mean the matter is solved. No, not at all. The virus is still there. We see localized outbreaks in this or that region, and there is a slight, not very high, but a slight increase overall in the number of infections. And of course, many people here suspect that there is an impact or an effect visible from the relaxation of the policies for social confinement and social distancing and so on that all member states have adopted. But we're better prepared now than we were when the crisis struck us first. We were unprepared, like everybody else, by the way, but we are taken by surprise and by this pandemic. Member states were not coordinating in the first instance in their responses. They, of course, acted understandably with the most important task of trying to protect their own citizens, and and which is understandable, but of course it didn't work that well, because it led to all sorts of shortages of equipment, of protective gear, of medical personnel, and so forth. So we had also a situation where the borders within the EU's internal market were closed, which is legally possible, but it had a tremendous impact that trade came to a standstill for a brief period. There was no goods flow. The trucks were piling up at the borders, and of course that is a disaster for the economy. So the unilateral approach was maybe necessary at the start, but the member states quickly understood that we have to go further and that we have to act at the EU level. What did the EU do? First of all, let me stress that member states showed solidarity with the other member states who were hit hardest, and there was wonderful examples of member states treating patients from another member states, providing medical equipment, sending medical teams over to deeply affected parts of other member states. So that is, I think, a wonderful example of an member state to member state solidarity that we saw. At the EU level, a couple of other things were done. First of all, mostly focused on making sure that we would have sufficient equipment and protective gear. The EU made a big tender for getting such gear from the industry, and with simplified rules to make it faster, etc. Never been done before, but it did work, because soon enough we had created a stockpile of equipment, of gear that member states were able to draw from. There were other measures as well, that like a very large grant by the EU budget to member states for financing their health facilities. We also created green lanes for road transport, for the truckers, to get the flow of goods back online. There were so-called health gateways that allowed people with sick people and infected people to pass borders in order to get treatment elsewhere. And lastly, and that brought us also to in action in Indonesia through EU coordination, about 600,000 EU citizens who were stranded in often faraway countries while on holiday. 600,000 EU citizens were repatriated from Indonesia. The number of repatriated citizens was around 20,000. Now, not everybody went back home on an EU-sponsored or EU-coordinated flight. Sometimes it was the national airlines who were mobilized for that, but still there was a good level of cooperation, and there was a good level of filling the seats of your plane with nationalities, with citizens from other EU member states. Let me also mention Garuda. Garuda at some point was the only airline remaining with a direct link to Europe, to Amsterdam airport, and many thousands of people have been able to come home thanks to that line. As a matter of fact, also many Indonesians who were stranded in Europe, seafarers in particular, could get home to Indonesia in that way. Now, we are now, as EU, reopening gradually our external borders. Our internal borders have been opened. So within the European space, it's the free travel the passport-free travel is re-established, but now our external borders are being opened, and which is on a step-by-step basis, and of course we prioritize, or we allow that for countries whom the member states and the European Commission consider to have safety or risk levels which are comparable to our own. Right now, there are 15 such countries on our list of permissible origins of travel. The list will grow, of course, as other countries get the virus under control. And we hope that Indonesia will get there too. Right now, Indonesia is not yet on that list because of the pandemic's development here. But there's one piece of good news that I can bring particularly to our student audience, and that is that the EU's external border has remained and will remain open for students and for researchers. So those of you who are planning or are about to go on a study visit, study period in Europe, you will be able to do so. Of course, with the normal requirements that apply to everybody, including in some cases some fit to fly document, etc. But that is secondary and totally doable. So that's where we are now. That is a positive development, especially, of course, for the tourism coming to Europe. The EU, you may know, is the biggest, the most important destination, tourist destination globally. So it's a major sector for our economy. And for that reason, of course, we were very keen to gradually open up our external borders. If you look at the domestic situation in Europe, then you see two things. You see the continuation of gradual relaxation in all member states, each of them following their own pattern, because at the end of the day, the disease did not hit each member state in the same way, to the same extent. So policies differ, but without a doubt, the common ingredients are, of course, first of all, promote change of behavior amongst the citizens, face masks, social distancing, personal hygiene, and the like, things that we know from Indonesia as well. Secondly, a strong emphasis on testing and on tracing of spots of infected areas or groups, and lastly, also impose a lockdown on specific hotspots whenever that is needed. And we've seen that happen in a particular locality in Germany, central Germany, and we see that now also happen in Catalonia in Spain. And this will stay with us for some time to come, simply because the virus is still there and we haven't got the vaccine yet. And so that is the top priority for the shorter to medium term, getting a vaccine. Because without a vaccine, evidently, no stable, no sustainable resumption of social life, public life is possible. Without a vaccine, there is no sustainable resumption of our economy. So getting that vaccine is an absolute top priority for us, as it is for other countries, including Indonesia, and we're doing everything we can to obtain it. Massive funding going into vaccine research and development and testing from the EU budget. 2.7 billion euros from our more emergency support fund, and which gives grants to or soft loans to institutes, research institutes, laboratories, and to pharmaceutical companies that have a promising idea for a vaccine, basically a possible vaccine that is nearing clinical trials. That is the big job. Timeline, impossible to say. To be very open and honest with you, we hope for something within the coming 12 to 18 months period. But of course, this is medical work. This has to be lead to a result that is reliable for the patients, for society, and of course, often trials do not bring the desired result. So we have to basically wait and see. In any case, the way we see this vaccine development is very strongly motivated by the principle that this is a global effort, that it makes no sense to have a vaccine on your own continent or your own country alone. If your neighboring continent or neighboring country hasn't got it, and the disease as a result would continue next door. So we have to see this as a global effort. What does that mean? That means that for the EU, once there is a vaccine available and coming into production, our goal is to make sure that this is accessible for all countries around the world in an equitable way, which doesn't mean it's free of charge, but it should be available for countries to obtain it and to produce it under license from the patent or copyright intellectual property holder. Now, that requires some funding, of course, particularly for the poorest countries on earth. They can't pay for this sort of thing, and for that reason, the EU has supported 2 large global pledging events in the course of May and June that altogether raised a good 10 billion euros for research, into vaccines, into therapeutic treatments, etc. And particularly with the angle of access for the poorest. And you may have seen, maybe not, but have a look at the Jakarta Post newspaper of last Saturday, where on the op-ed pages there is an article by the executive director of one of the large global initiatives for vaccine development. It is called Gavi, G-A-V-I. You can also do a Google on it, and that is one of the big platforms with which we work together. And the target is very simply to try and get 2 billion people vaccinated by the end of next year. That is the upshot of the medical pandemic situation and the EU's response to it, both on our continent and globally. I'll now say something about our economic situation and our economic response. Now, evident that the pandemic is reaping havoc in the European economy. The latest forecast from the European Commission and from the European Central Bank forecast a contraction of our economy by about 8% this year. So that is absolutely massive. And it means that all of the job gains that the EU made after the financial crisis of 2009, all these job gains were set back. Companies have become heavily indebted in many cases because, of course, they had no income, there was no demand, they had no sales, but at the same time, of course, they had their assets, they had their payrolls and loans to honor. So there is a tremendous impact there. We haven't seen the end of this, of course. We're still, first of all, waiting for the figures of the second quarter of this year. Secondly, we know for sure that some of the impact will come only later. And if you just look at young people, students, they graduate round about this time of the year. They will start looking for jobs and register themselves by the 1st of August, the 1st of September. So you can predict with certainty that by that time, youth unemployment will again shoot up. It is already high now. It's 14% of young people are unemployed, and that will certainly increase in the beginning of the third quarter. Our approach to all of this is twofold. First of all, deal with the emergency. That is to say, try and keep companies open, afloat, solvent, and with cash flow while the crisis lasts. It basically means allowing member states to provide financial support to companies for their running costs. It means the EU subsidizing through the member states the payrolls of companies, not everyone, but those in sectors that are hit most. Subsidize the wage bill, in other words, to avoid layoffs by the firms, and with the idea of trying to ride out this first impact, an impact that is diminishing. The first figures do show it from the company level, also from the business sentiment indicators. We are getting a little bit of back in an uptick towards more demands, towards more resumption of sales and of economic activity in general. That has to go on, and in order, of course, to try and compensate for the tremendous impact we suffered and are still suffering. Many things were done. There's a whole array of measures, of decisions that were taken by the European Commission, by the European Central Bank, by the European Investment Bank, and all in support of specific sectors, aviation, transport in general, retail, tourism, the agricultural, the agri-food sector in particular. That is for the immediate term. Now, for the medium to long term, I'm looking for a moment at my phone to see if if there was any news from the major European summit that is happening in Brussels these days, because the medium to long-term recovery is now in full debate amongst the member states in the European Council, that is the supreme body leading on top of the European Union. And now the summit started on Friday. It would have ended normally on Saturday, but it went on Sunday, and it's what I see now is that it will resume again today. So clearly there's a major discussion going on between member states, but it's understandable because there's much at stake in many different ways. First of all, it's about allocating a lot of budget, a lot of money for the work of the EU. There's two big amounts that are relevant here. One is the amount proposed for the EU's long-term budget, so our regular budget for the next 7 years, 2021 to 2027. And for that budget, a regular budget, the proposal is 1.1 trillion euros. Now, trillion euros, that doesn't fit on the calculator of my iPhone. Maybe yours is better, but this is massive, massive money. The second part of the discussion is about this very special recovery plan that the European Commission President has proposed, and that's a plan that has been called Next Generation EU, and that plan of proposal foresees an additional spending of another 750 billion euros, and that would have to be made available immediately from next year onwards. Now, very, very big numbers there, and of course that each discussion about budget, whether it's in Indonesia or in Europe, of course, is delicate. It's something where different interests come at play, where not everybody always agrees about the conditions for making the money available. There is a question about how much of it should be grants directly paid to member states and how much of it should be loans. Of course, in each situation, there are receivers and there are payers, and the delicate balance here is to strike a balance that is politically agreeable amongst member states. Let me first of all say, of course, that it's totally understood in the EU that we have an objective of promoting cohesion between the member states, and that means that the more affluent member states will be paying for the development of the lesser affluent member state. That is a totally accepted principle. But of course, we're here talking about amounts of money that even for the more advanced, more affluent member states are difficult in their perspective, difficult to sustain. So that is what is issue here, and with in the background, of course, very much a notion of where does the EU wish to go for the medium to long term. Now, one thing is very clear, that whatever comes out of the discussions in Brussels today, tomorrow, is that our recovery plan will be a green plan, because that is, I think, a totally accepted notion amongst all member states that yes, we have to deal with COVID. Yes, we have to get our economy back on the road. But yes, we cannot allow ourselves to forget about the big other problem that is facing us in the nearer future, if not already now, and that is climate change. So in our recovery planning, we will include this very strong green dimension the so-called Green Deal, as the policy plan is called, into our rebound effort. And our goal is very, very simple to state. It is the goal of being carbon neutral for the whole of the European continent by the year 2050. Carbon neutrality. A very simple goal. It's of course very ambitious and a very complex goal as well. So over the coming weeks and months, we will see a lot of policy discussions about how exactly to realize that. One important thing to stress here, that Green Deal, carbon neutrality is the goal we are discussing for Europe. But of course, we are at the same time seeking global partnerships through the multilateral negotiations. The next round is scheduled for next year, and also, of course, through our bilateral partnerships, such as the one with Indonesia. And there I can say that the EU very much wants to partner with Indonesia on these objectives. Not exactly the same thing as we do in Europe for Indonesia, but with the same sort of global goals of stopping climate change from accelerating, bringing it under control, and making sure that we put our economies on a sustainable green basis. So that is our goal. We have started discussions about that with Indonesia in different platforms, in working groups. There was one last week, there was one 2 weeks ago. And we hope to make progress on that in the course of this year and next. So that is our medium to long-term recovery with the green dimension incorporated. Now, a few last remarks of mine about the global context. How does the European Union see that? First, COVID. As I probably have hinted already sufficiently, for the EU, there's only one solution possible for COVID, and that is a global solution. It's impossible to solve the pandemic on your own soil alone and through your own means. We have to have multilateral international action. It's a big role here to play here for the UN institutions, and particularly the WHO, the World Health Organization, much under pressure, of course, in the recent weeks, weakened without a doubt by the decision by the US to withdraw from WHO. The EU has criticized that decision. We have to examine how the WHO has functioned, how it has performed. We have to examine how we have performed ourselves. Of course, WHO cannot possibly on its own do the job either. But this is absolutely not the time to undermine the only multilateral organization for global health governance that we have. So that is one aspect, a very strong stress on the multilateral global governance to deal with COVID. Secondly, if you look at the economy and the development agenda of the world, then there's only one conclusion possible. The SDG agenda, Sustainable Development Goals agenda, has been set back. That's clear. Countries have seen much of their much impact on their results and achievements in terms of poverty reduction. Many poor are again poorer, and some middle income have become poor again. So this is a major social economic crisis, and of course the EU will wish to cooperate very, very strongly with all developing countries, particularly the least developed countries, to get back on track with their delivery. The EU, that is to say, the EU budget on its own, but also budgets coming from all the EU member states, have put 36 billion euros on the table for helping third countries. So this is all grant money and soft loans, helping third countries to deal with the socio-economic and development impact of COVID. It's money from, as I said, EU and from the EU member states. We call that Team Europe. And Team Europe, I can tell you, is also active in Southeast Asia in the context of ASEAN. And today or tomorrow, we will publish a new overview, look at our website, indicating that a new tally shows that the total amount of money dedicated for ASEAN countries from the side of Team Europe is 800 million euros, grants as well as loans from the big development banks of the EU, the European Investment Bank, but also from development banks from France, Germany in particular. Indonesia, but also active. We have, in terms mobilized 20 million euros for your country, on one hand for helping vulnerable and protecting vulnerable groups. On the other hand, by investing in the health care infrastructure, 2 hospitals, one in East Java and the other in South Sulawesi. We do that together, EU plus the French Development Bank. And lastly, we're also paying 2 billion euros to the WHO program here in this country for their activities. So quite a significant support by the EU for third countries. Money is one thing, trade is another, but it is equally important for economic recovery. The EU believes in free trade, with rules, of course, around it. There is a discussion about self-reliance, like there is here in this country, about self-reliance in certain areas, in certain sectors, for certain products that are strategic. We don't want to be vulnerable and over-reliant on one or the other provider. And some things we want to have also some capacity at home. But at the same time, we very much believe that we cannot lock ourselves up. We can't possibly start producing everything we need on our own soil. We will continue to need trade and foreign investment into the EU and out of the EU. And so not going to give up on the global supply chains at all, but maybe diversify them a little bit and make yourself less vulnerable to single suppliers. Strong belief in the WTO, organization that we co-founded ourselves. WTO is under pressure as well. One other case, and here we are working with 18 countries already to repair some of the damage that was done by the US's withdrawal from the dispute settlement top board. And so we have basically set up with 18 other countries an alternative a surrogate that will simply function as the WTO board used to do for as long as the standoff at WTO lasts. And here we are seeking also cooperation with Indonesia. We would like to convince our Indonesian partner to join that effort as well, which I think is a win-win effort. The last thing I would say is about our trade agreements. Expansion of the network of the agreements is ongoing. More and more FTAs between EU and foreign partners, including in Asia. We've got an FTA with Korea, with Japan, with Singapore, with Vietnam. And of course, as I'm sure you all know, we are negotiating one with Indonesia, and which we hope to realize as soon as we can. And all of this is of course part of our diversification of global supply chains. Now, the very last point I wanted to mention is about disinformation, because I think we have come to the realization that we were a little bit self-satisfied about it and about the risks that this causes. But we have come to witness in the past 3 to 4 months that disinformation can be deadly. Of course, often disinformation is about getting all sorts of nonsense into the world, and which at the end of the day doesn't matter much. But if you have disinformation during a pandemic, then this can be deadly. And for that reason, the EU has, over the past 2 or 3 months, set up a whole new approach towards battling disinformation that is targeted against us by state or parastatal entities or state-supported entities to the detriment of our well-being and of our security. So this is an absolutely vital new priority that we have for Europe. I believe something of that is also reciprocated here in Indonesia, where you suffer from similar risks. And so here, I think, again, cooperation between the EU and Indonesia would be very, very useful. Let me make one thing very clear, and that is about if you fight disinformation, you don't fight against the freedom of expression, you don't fight against the freedom of the media. It's about fighting against individuals or state-sponsored entities or states themselves that actually abuse our freedoms and against us. And so this is something that goes very much to the core of the democratic makeup of the European Union. And I believe we have in Indonesia a like-minded partner on that. So we feel that we can engage with your country on this topic. Good, I have spoken quite a while. I apologize for that, but Cindy, once you get me going, then but I'm very, very, very happy to enter into a discussion with all students in the rest of this session. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. So now let's go ahead and dive into our question and answer session. And I will be taking 3 questions per batch, which will be then answered by Ambassador Piket before moving on to the next batch. So in this first batch, to ask your question, you can use the raise hand feature on your Zoom app by clicking participants and then selecting raise hand on the bottom right, and I will be randomly selecting from those who have raised their hands. So for the first batch, I'll be taking 3 questions. The first one from UGM, we have Khalil Makarim. All right, please state your name and your question.
Okay, good afternoon, Mr. Ambassador. I would like to ask specifically on about how the EU would recover its economy on a faster and a better scale, and perhaps to look at the picture about Brexit. I mean, post-Brexit, the EU is suffering, the UK is suffering, and with the possibility of no trade deals with the UK and the US, will it be possible for the European Union itself to be more active, more in promoting with in promoting its trade deals even further to save the EU economy itself and the United Kingdoms? And the second part, I would like to ask about the Green Deal, about how countries could work together within the European Union, and to what extent it would create a net gain of jobs prior in comparison to before the days of COVID-19. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Khalil. And for our second question, we'll go to UMY, Adam Andri.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I can't turn on my camera video because it doesn't work.
Okay, sure.
So,
No
okay, first, I want to thank you for the opportunity given to me, honorable to Mr. Pick as speaker, and all of participants here, they all my love. So, my question is, we can see the world is still not fully stable because of COVID-19, and this has a major impact on the world economy. For example, Singapore fell into the abyss of recession in the second quarter to minus 46%, and minus annual quarter of Singapore rates 12.6%. This also affected several countries in the region, Asia. For Indonesia itself, we minus 4%, said the Minister of Finance. And this is also affected all sectors such as the Indonesian stock market index, index in America such as Dow Jones also dropped dramatically. And this is probably still not certain of the stability of index because until now the peak of it, there is no certainty. So my question is, how foreign policy look at the current situation and condition of the world economy? How can Indonesia be able to avoid the economy downturn and avoid a recession like Singapore? What is the solution? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Adam Andri. And for our last question for this batch, from UMY, Yovano Afika.
So thank you for the opportunity. Hello, Mr. Ambassador. So my question is, how do the European Union respond towards the speculation of the coronavirus disease that is as an biological weapon to destroy the humanitarian civilization and destroy human? There's the conspiration over there.
I'm sorry,
How can we know the
Yovano,
proof and what exactly happened? Okay.
can you repeat your question, but maybe without video because the audio is quite
Okay.
choppy. Yeah. Turning off your video might help.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Game of Thrones. All right.
How do the European Union respond towards the speculation of the coronavirus disease? There is an eradication of the humanitarian life and its humanitarian population, or it can call as the biological weapon to destroy the humanitarian civilization. And I'm gonna ask about the proof. What is exactly is happened in his work? Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. That makes up the first batch, so I'll hand the floor back over to you, Ambassador.
All right. Thanks very much for three very interesting questions. And I'll do my best, I think, but all three questions are, of course, very, very broad and very, very challenging in themselves. But first, the question from Khalil Makarim at UGM, particularly focusing on trade and the relation between the recovery and the Brexit. Now, well, what shall I say? First of all, Brexit was never the EU's choice, and we would have, of course, much preferred the UK part of it. But what our chief negotiator keeps on saying, and that is Mr. Michel Barnier, he keeps on saying that impact is unavoidable. Brexit will cost money, will cost jobs, and there is no way of avoiding any impact of Brexit. That goes for the European Union, of course, because we lose one of our larger member states, important member states with a very significant economy. But it goes for the UK, even more so, because at the end of the day, the trade dependence of the UK on the EU 27, as we have them now, the 27 member states, is very, very high. So there's no two ways about it. This will have a cost. Now, what the EU has always wanted is avoid a cliff, avoid an Brexit without an agreement. That remains our steadfast objective, steadfast goal. The EU has worked very, very hard for that. We want to fulfill the political declaration that the UK and the EU struck late in last year, which is a very ambitious declaration. We want to fulfill that because we want to stay as closely as we can to the UK, even after the UK has the transition period is over. But here, it's at the end of the day, it takes two to tango, and as our negotiator has said repeatedly, there has not been a sufficient engagement by the British counterpart on the key aspects of the negotiation. We remain steadfast. We will continue to work for this. The clock is ticking. Evidently, by the end of this year, any new agreement that is negotiated with the UK has to be adopted and ratified by everybody. So we have precious little time left, and some of our time is, of course, occupied by dealing with the COVID. So the worst sort of circumstances. At the same time, we hope that it can help sober the minds of the negotiator, particularly on the UK side, so that we can move forward successfully. The Green Deal you mentioned as well. I don't have the figures in my head, but we are convinced that that going green and going carbon neutral can go hand in hand, can continue to go hand in hand with more growth and more jobs. That's what the track record of the EU shows over the past 30 years, where we have added about 40% of GDP to our GDP. So we have grown by 40% our GDP, while the CO2 emissions have gone down by a good 30%. So it just goes to show that greening the economy and creating jobs and creating boosting your national income, that is totally reconcilable. It takes some investment, some technology, of course, but it particularly takes determination and consistent long-term objective setting and rule setting. The second question from Adam Ivy. I didn't see which university you're at, but can a country, can Indonesia avoid a recession? That was the question I read. Heard you last say, and you know, the World Bank has done its assessments. The government, the National Bank, and the Finance Ministry have done their assessments, and Indonesia is very close to entering a recession like other countries, and it's no wonder the global trade has diminished and has impacted Indonesia as well. Maybe buffered a little bit up to now, but so maybe there's a glimmer of hope there. But it is a fact. Investment has dropped very much. The investment FDI coming from the EU went down by 75% in the first months of this year. Now that is massive, and of course investment translates into jobs in fairly quickly. So so that is an indicator. The third indicator is of course simply what you and I see whenever we go out shopping with our face mask and temperature, of course, checked, everything. But in the shopping malls, in the shops, it's very quiet. There's little demand. Demand has changed. People keep money in their savings account in order to be prepared for whatever may come. So it will be very tough for a country, for any country, to avoid a recession for the shorter term. But the key question is not will you or will you not have a recession. The key question, how do you plan for the recovery afterwards, and what do you do? What is your strategy? And so that is, I think, a key question for any government. And I've talked a little bit about how the EU sees that for our economy, for our continent, how we see trade as part of that strategy, trade and investment promotion. And we look forward very much to intensifying our trade relation with Indonesia to try and boost the recovery of this country. Because one thing is very clear, our studies have shown it, our impact studies for the future free trade agreement between Indonesia and us. And it shows that a good free trade agreement between our two sides will add GDP to your economy. And not a small sum, no. Every year, 2 billion euros extra GDP once the FTA is ratified and fully in motion. So this is a major benefit for this country, and we hope that we can work for that and together in order to help your rebound happen in the best possible way. Last question from Jofano from UMY. We were laughing a little bit, Jofano, when you asked the question, but that was because of the logo that you put on screen of the winter is coming. That, of course, is a wonderful, great TV series, and And but it somehow seemed to link in with the question you posed, and about the speculation that COVID means the end of human life on this planet. You know, I'm not a speculator, and others are, and they're much better at it than myself. But as a policy official, as an ambassador to this country, my message is that yes, this is a tremendous impact. This is a disease that causes deaths, many deaths, and I can only sympathize with the families in this country that have lost their fathers, mothers, brothers, sisters, etc., their friends, and so on. It's horrible. But the solution is one that we can make ourselves, and through concerted action, through dealing with the outbreak, through developing the vaccine, and through things that are simply within the reach of everybody, including you and I. That is social distancing, very simple things like wearing this mask and washing your hands and maintaining the 1 meter, 1.5, whatever. Yes, we can do without a cinema. Unfortunately, I like that winter is coming. I would like to, but we can do without it, if we have to, and we have to, and that's the thing. So social rules, tracing, dealing with outbreaks, lockdowns of parts of a city or a neighborhood and so on, even a building, immediately. So it is doable. So I'm not speculating that at all. That's the simple reality. The examples of some countries have simply shown it around the globe. And in Europe, let me mention one example, very interesting example, and it's Greece. Greece, a country, the most hard-hit country in the financial crisis 2009, and still working extremely hard to get out of the to repay all the loans, etc., but doing that successfully. The Greek Prime Minister, the Greek government saw very, very well that if Greece is not free of COVID pandemic, or certainly is not past the peak, then the tourist season is gone, even before it starts. And so all efforts were made on for early action, taking measures, taking the right steps, disciplined by the Greek people, the citizens. All Greek people became Spartans, if you know the history a little bit. Disciplined, working hard for this common goal, and it does show that the country, if it pulls itself together, if a society sees the common goal, if you recognize the contribution that you as an individual citizen can bring to the solution, then it will work.
All right. Thank you, Ambassador. For our second batch, we have 3 questions lined up. The first one from UII, Raihan. Yes.
All right. Thank you for the opportunity. Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, Mr. Ambassador. So I'd like to ask the questions, maybe out of the COVID topic, if I may. So I'd like to ask the questions related to my European Union studies, the final exam today. So it has a topic about European Union and NATO cooperations. So since I can ask to number 1 person who represent European Union in Indonesia, it's a great opportunity for me. So my questions is, is there any commitment between European Union and NATO to combat hybrid threats, Islamophobes and Xenophobia in Europe? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Raihan. For the second question from UPN Veteran, Al Faiz Alif Yudhistira.
Okay, thank you so much for the opportunity. Actually, I wanted to ask outside the COVID-19 topic also. So I've been reading some articles online that there are some difficulties for Central European countries such as, let's just say, Slovakia to absorb rescue aid funds from the EU. And as what I've researched is actually one of the factors is because of high practice of corruption within the respective countries. My question is, does the EU has a framework to eradicate corruption within its member states countries? And also this far, does the EU have been putting fighting corruption as a top priority agenda? Thank you.
All right, thank you. And for the last question from UPN Veteran, Zaki Adisaputra.
Thank you. Good afternoon, FPCI friends. Thank you for this good opportunity. Dear Mr. Ambassador, the topic is a pandemic COVID-19. So, in this situation, there are many problems arising from the COVID-19 as international disaster. So, if I view from an international humanitarian perspective, in the emergency status of COVID-19 pandemic in European Union, so how European Union countries impose restrictions, delays, or reductions in the human rights of their citizens in emergency situations, as regulated in the Siracusa principle, where we can implement Siracusa principle for Indonesian policy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And that concludes the second batch. So I'll hand the floor back over to Ambassador.
Well, thank you. Thank you for three other very good questions. And first question from Raihan of UIY. Commitment between EU and NATO to combat hybrid threats, xenophobia, etc. First of all, I'd say that NATO is, of course, a very important partner of the EU, but not all member states are a member of NATO, and there's no. It has its own identity. It's a defense, a military organization. The EU is not. The EU has defense and military policies and capabilities, and it's expanding. But of course, NATO is something different. Yes, the EU does recognize the hybrid threats in our region, in Europe, but also around it. So that is a fact. It is a top priority for us, for our foreign and security policy, to deal with such issues. We are in a situation where we live in a neighborhood that's where there's a lot of instability. If you look at the Middle East, or if you look at Northern Africa or Saharan Africa, these very days, Mali, country of Mali, a vast country, very thinly populated, with a strong extremist, jihadist insurgents under big, tremendous threats there, with knock-on problems for the neighbors of Mali and for the who are the neighbors of the EU. So it's a very interconnected situation. So, and we have to cope with that. Does that link in with xenophobia? I'm not so sure. That is a one-to-one thing. Combating xenophobia is something that has many more different dimensions. It's not just linked to extremism, or but it's also has to do with cultural, with religious aspects, and so on. So, and here my answer would be that first of all, that it is about bringing coherence to your society. If you see how much the EU has remained attractive for migrants, for refugees, for irregular migrants over the past decade, then it makes me think that many of these people continue to see Europe as a safe place to be, which we are proud of. We want to help refugees and asylum seekers. Secondly, what does sometimes pose itself as an issue is the good assimilation of minorities, of refugees, asylum seekers into mainstream society. That's a big job. It can't be done overnight. It's a difficult one, and especially difficult at a time when we had a financial crisis, which was precisely also the time when there was the 2 million or so refugees reaching Europe caused by the Syrian conflict. So a confluence of issues that you can't deal with overnight, and it takes time. Xenophobia exists in Europe, as in other parts of the world, but I do think I can say with honesty that it continues to be a fringe of some groups on the far right, on the far left, I don't know, and that it is not part of the mainstream. If you look at the elections in member states over the past couple of years, or let's say the last 2 years, then you don't see this the impact on a massive scale. It remains a fringe. And even though you see fragmentation in the politics of many member states, most of the political parties remain in the mainstream, and at national level, and also in the European Parliament. So I remain hopeful, not ignorant of the problem, not naive. We have to continue to deal with it. Social cohesion is something that is not simple to maintain, but the mainstream, the middle ground, remains vital to keeping this risk at bay. The question from Alfaiz from UPPNYA about the link between using budget money, EU budget money, successfully, and corruption, or the lack of corruption, and what we do about it. Now, first of all, I confirm that the effectiveness of spending depends critically on the effectiveness of how the money is managed, and whether the money goes to the right targets, whether the money is managed and tendered properly, that the best offers are and the best services are obtained for the money, that you have value for money, and that the money is spent quickly. because at the end of the day, it's about having impact quickly and getting results. So corruption is fighting corruption is a key thing for us, and in all our operations, also the ones that run by my delegation, we have pay tremendous attention to proper management of money, sound management, as we call it, by ourselves, but also by the people, the contractors that we use, and we, of course, we ourselves check accounts and reports and this and that about eligibility and correct use of rules and choice of experts and so on. We have external audits, both of the contractor that we use, but also of ourselves. We're subject to our internal audit system, so lots of checks after the expenditure, besides checks before the expenditure, and in the last instance, we have our anti-fraud office of the EU that can investigate cases if allegations were made. If you, our finance, were to write to them and say, you know, here I have a case and I've seen this and that and so and so, then they will investigate that if there's a credible information. So, and that investigation can lead to criminal trials and people being fired. So I feel that as a very direct responsibility for myself, and so I'll do my best to live up to the standards. So that's how the system works at micro level, like my mission here, but the same goes for member states that are, of course, audited by the very same court of audit. But then in the global in a global manner. I don't know the specific report you referred to, so I won't comment on that. But I hope that I have given an impression of you know, the principles and the practices how we tackle the fight against corruption. Lastly, Zaki Adi from UPM. About the, if I understood you well, the link between the interface between social restrictions or similar on the one hand, and protecting human and civil rights on the other hand. It's a good question. I think that you can't have a black and white answer. There is no hard dividing line where the justification for one restrictions ends and the prevalence or the primary value of human rights begins. We know, there is disinformation in this world, active disinformation with a criminal or political or subversive intention, and we know that. We've seen it. We have registered cases for that. So I forget the number now, but a massive number of cases every day that are spotted by a special division in Brussels, and that we try to target in the first instance by undermining the hoax and discrediting the false information. And secondly, we have possibilities of pursuing the producers of such information, including by very close cooperation with the big social media platforms. And now, that is totally legitimate action for any government to take. and it is totally legitimate for any citizen to ask for, because your interests are at stake as well, besides interest of the state, the country as a whole. And somewhere, of course, somehow, sometimes you see such interventions by some countries being criticized by the very people who produce false information and disinformation as being against democracy, against human rights, and this and that. Now, for me, the balance is somewhat clear, and for each and every case, you have to strike that balance. But you have to, at some points, indeed decide that certain people don't have the right to speak in certain manners of speaking, and that is nothing to do with denial of human rights. That is simply a protection of the common good, of the security of the public space that is democracy, and that is being undermined all too often by people who have only their own self-interest or the interest of their authorities at heart. And so, a difficult area, a difficult topic, and very, very much of a modern new problem. We didn't have that in the same way before the existence of social media, where you can reach 1 million people within a second or two. So that's a big task that lawmakers and policymakers have to grapple today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. And for our third and final batch, our first question we'll take from UII, Agus Zuriana Poetra.
Thank you, moderator. Well, thank you for Honorable Mr. Ambassador. What a great presentation. I was interested in your explanation, in the beginning of explanation, talking about the European Economic Area, if I'm not mistaken. It's kind of making EU member to trade more effectively and easier. Well, let's say it's kind of EU free trade area. But however, to this kind of situation, to this kind of crisis, I was thinking like these members of European countries, like will be focusing on doing the maximizing their efforts to the internal factor. I mean, to internal matters, like the internal things or internal problems in their own country. The question is there any kind of possibility for these European member states to become to deny the existence of this free trade, because they will focus on their internal problems? So I was thinking like they will just deny this free trade area. And if it's possible, if it happens, what will the EU will do to this kind of situation? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And for our second question from UMY, Anjas Nanda Pangestu.
Okay, so thank you for the moderator for the opportunity to ask, and also thank you for the ambassador for the very detailed explanation on the current condition on European Union. So my question here is about it's probably the same question as the previous question, but what I want to ask here is in the internal of the European Union itself. So we know that European Union has faced so many internal problems, like the political conflict between Hungary and also the Netherlands, and also the frugal four demand on the cut the package of the European Union itself. So what I want to ask here is now, is there any resolution on European Union to solve this problem and start to cooperate each other to against the pandemic COVID-19. Thank you.
All right, for the third question from UGM, Andaru Zakaria.
Thank you for the time, FPCI for having us to have a tea time with the ambassador. As for the question is that, as for replying your answer that mentioned refugees, recently I've seen a European External Action Service homepage. It is said that the European Union is allocating about 35,000 euros to provide support for Indonesian Red Cross in delivering water, sanitary facilities, healthcare, psychosocial supports, as well as PPEs to 99 Rohingya rescued and allowed to disembark in Indonesia after more than 120 grueling days at sea. Indeed, it is a good news for EU and Indonesia relations regarding commitment in handling refugees issues. But the question is how's with the update within EU countries regarding protections for refugees from COVID-19 pandemic? Is there any bigger plan for EU in specifically handling refugees worsen because the situations in midst of everyone need to ensure their both health and economic recovery? Thank you. That's all my questions.
All right, thank you. Ambassador, for this last batch, we still have 2 students that are raising their hand. If you don't mind, should we take them? All right. All right. So for the second to last question from UMY, Clara Clarissa.
Thank you for the opportunity. Good afternoon, Mr. Ambassador. In your explanation, you said that EU have given aid to third countries, including Indonesia. Apart from the aid that EU had given, is there any concrete cooperation between EU and Indonesia to combat COVID-19, especially in economic sector? Thank you.
All right, thank you. And for the last question, we had Utin Triwahyuni. Would you still like to ask your question?
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry I cannot turn on my camera. Good afternoon, Ambassador. I have 2 questions that I think it's connecting. The first question is, how use action to the protester that reject vaccination, believe the pandemic is conspiracy, and see that government attempt to take away basic human rights under the guise of fighting the infection? And the second question is, how does this movement affect the spread of COVID-19 in the EU? Thank you.
All right, thank you. And that makes up the last of the questions. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks. I'm glad you you added 2 more questions, because there were the first 2 lady questions. So well done. Right, the question from Agus from UII. About obligation of member states to comply with EU trade policy and EU law. I can say very simply that the EU is the way the EU works. It is a very consultative process. It is something before anything is decided. There's lots of consultation with society in general, but particularly amongst the member states, within the Council of Ministers. Proposals are discussed and discussed again, and at different levels, and that also goes for trade policy. And at a certain moment, you have an agreement like with Vietnam, FTA, And then the question is asked to the member states, do you agree or do you not? And if the answer is yes, then the thing will be adopted by the Council, by the European Parliament, and then it becomes law. And like in any rule-based, law-based society or system of governments, the law has to be applied, and one cannot say the day or 2 days later, sorry, but I don't like it any longer. I don't do it. That is true at the level of for member states. That's true for companies, for individuals within the EU. So it doesn't happen that often, to be honest. But it does happen at times that the European Commission takes member states to court if one or the other doesn't live up to the standards that they themselves decided or agreed, and Parliament adopted, etc. So that is the ultimate method for ensuring compliance of law across the entirety of the EU. And so it's a very legal approach to it and legal motivation, but fundamentally, of course, it's about making sure that we live in this one European Union, this internal, this single market where, you know, everybody has their freedoms and has the right to use those freedoms. Individuals, employees, workers, students, etc., and companies. So there is a lot of many tools to make sure that laws and trade agreements are implemented coherently and consistently across the EU. And incidentally, if you apply that to foreign trade, suppose one day imagine the FTA between Indonesia and the EU, and one day somebody says, I don't want that product from the EU any longer, or I don't need that service from Indonesia any longer, I don't let it in anymore. Of course, then the other side of the agreement would complain. Indonesia would complain to the EU, hey, what's this? We agreed, and now, so also bilaterally, you have this way to correct things that don't go well, and make sure that the commitments that were signed up to are fulfilled. The question from Anjas Nanda from UNY was a tiny bit more political, but it's in a way about similar things. You know, you refer to the Frugal Four and the divisions between member states and right now about how to design the future budget and this special rescue recovery package. It is a big discussion. That's clear. The fact that we're entering the fourth day of the European Summit shows it, and that there are some divisions between some member states about how we design this. And I'm not so worried about that, to be very frank. I've been working for the EU for a while now, and we've had similar debates at similar time, other times in the past, repeatedly, including during the financial crisis, very difficult discussions as well, and before about the new treaties and so on. So, and we've always managed to come forward with a solution that could carry the support from all member states. And now, why does it last so long now? A 4-day summit is probably, I don't know if there's been any before, but so it's probably possibly a record. But at the end of the day, now the stakes are higher than maybe than they've ever been before in terms of the amount of money that's being asked for, in terms of the manner in which the money is to be spent. And in terms of one other thing that I didn't mention, but there is a bit of a principle behind it, behind the discussion about how we treat debt inside the EU, and some of the elements of the proposals that the European Commission has made is basically it involves a certain mutualization or a collectivization of debt. In other words, if one member state makes a debt, that then the collectivity of member states guarantees that debt, and if something were to go wrong, would compensate the creditor. So that is a pretty fundamental sort of issue. And for some member states, that's very important. So you have to recognize that, and because it could or could not set a pointer or a course of where the EU is going to go in terms of its financial planning. This is politics. Not just EU politics at the EU level, but also politics in member states. Each and every head of state, each president and each prime minister have their parliaments, have their political parties, their constituency to respond to. So it is no wonder that this is not always easy, and that the debates are intense, and right now they are. Will we get out of the debate into a conclusion? My wish, but not only my wish, my expectation is yes. But probably we will know tomorrow if I'm right or not. But I'm quite optimistic, to be honest. A question from Andura Zakaria from UGY. I think about the refugees. Yes, we were very very much commended the decision by the government of Indonesia to shelter these poor 99 people who had been sitting on boats in the Andaman Sea for months. Very, very courageous decision by the government, and that's why we supported it with the aid delivery with a modest but still important, meaningful amount. We will do more if needed now for this group, but who knows for other groups that may land on Indonesian shores. COVID refugees. I don't know if you mean people who are fleeing COVID, or whether you meant refugees with COVID who are fleeing a conflict and so on. If it's the latter, then I would think there's not much of a difference in how we would approach that. A refugee is somebody who merits protection and shelter, and we would aim to accommodate such a person. The COVID factor is a complication, it's an extra challenge, not just for the individual concerned, but also for the person who receives him, her. And so that is just makes it more necessary for us to treat, have the right protocols in place. because of course the people, the refugee shelters and the accommodation should not be turned into places where the COVID virus outbreaks happen. So it's an extra burden and an extra task, but fundamentally it does not detract from our wish and obligation to help refugees wherever legitimate they reach us. Clara from UMY, the EU's aid to third countries and economic cooperation as not, which is another way of solving the same problem, but not through aid. We believe in both. We provide grants and soft loans for specific projects, for health, for regional infrastructure, for renewable energy, etc. But at the same time, we believe in building a strong economic relationship with Indonesia. We want to integrate closer with your economy. We believe that's good for us, but also good for Indonesia. Our studies show that there is clear benefit for Indonesia coming from our future FTA, 2 billion euros per year, extra growth, extra jobs, and extra income for your country. So that's very significant. Our studies also show that proportionately, Indonesia stands to gain more than does the EU, than will the EU. A couple of percentage points difference between better performance for Indonesia compared to the EU. We're happy with that because this is part of Indonesia's drive towards upper middle and high income status, about becoming a developed country, no longer emerging, but going up the global economic ladder. It's a goal we support totally. Why? Because we adhere to the very strong notions of the Sustainable Development Goals for 2030. We adhere to the aspect that a world in which wealth and economic progress is shared, is spread smoothly, consistently across globe, is also a more stable and a more secure world, is a world in which there are fewer conflicts, and is also a world where you are better able to partner with each other for global goods, like the climate and many other things. So, yes, in other words, totally agree with your point. In economic cooperation, partnership for the long run is very much part of our drive in bringing in our relations with Indonesia. Now, a question from Utin Tree from UII. The notion that the COVID pandemic is a conspiracy. Well, I must admit that I haven't read these articles because even if I saw them, I frankly would think they're a waste of time. This is beyond the pale of serious thinking. beyond the pale of science research, and beyond the pale of serious policy making and cooperation. So, do they impact EU policy? I don't think so at all. I think we are very much certain that we have a real problem to deal with, and in fact, the whole debate is not necessary. You see it in front of your eyes. So I don't know if I reassure you by saying this or not, but certainly we don't lend any credence whatsoever to that sort of conspiracy theory. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Ambassador. And for now, I think that can wrap up the question and answer session. Thank you so much for the enthusiasm from all the students. We had so many questions today, and I'm sure that everyone has still many questions, but unfortunately we can't take them all because of time constraints. But again, thank you, Ambassador Piket, and thank you to all the students for your questions. And now, before we close, the ambassador has actually prepared a fun quiz for us. And if you answer these questions correctly, you will be receiving a goodie bag with cool gifts and prizes. And there are only going to be 3 questions, and they're all multiple choice. So to answer these questions, please use the raise hand feature, and I will choose the first ones that raise their hand. So we will begin the quiz. And the first question is, the European Union is an economic and political union of 27 member states. Together, the EU has built a zone of stability, democracy, and sustainable development whilst maintaining cultural diversity, tolerance, and individual freedoms. The EU is the largest trade bloc in the world, as well as the world's largest source and destination of foreign direct investment. Collectively, the EU and its member states are the largest donor of official development assistance, or ODA, providing more than half of ODA globally. The EU was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for advancing the causes of peace, reconciliation, democracy, and human rights in Europe. The question is, in what year did the EU receive the Nobel Peace Prize? Is it A, 1982, B, 1992, C, 2002, or D, 2012? So if you know the answer, please raise your hand. And the first one to raise their hand was from UGM, Khalil Makarim. So Khalil, what is your answer?
2012, final answer.
2012, final answer. He locked it in. Is that the correct answer? Yes, correct answer. Thank you, Khalil, and congratulations. We will please send your address to us, yay, and we will send you the goodie bag. Okay, so please lower your hands and we'll begin the second question. The second question, the EU has a funding scheme to support activities in the fields of education, training, youth, and sport. The scheme includes a scholarship program for students from all over the world to pursue a master or doctoral degree in Europe. The student will study in at least 2 universities located in 2 different European countries. More than 1,900 Indonesians have benefited from the scholarship program. The question is, what is the name of the program? Is it A, Copernicus, B, Galileo, C, Erasmus, or D, Socrates? First person to answer to raise their hand was from UPN veteran Alfaiz Alif Yudhistira. Alfaiz, what is your answer?
The answer is Erasmus. C.
Are you sure?
Yes.
Final answer? Okay. Good job. So we'll send you, please send us your address and we will send you your prize. All right, and for the third and final question. 1 second. All right. On the 15th of June, the European Commission launched an interactive web platform that contains essential information for a safe relaunch of free movement and tourism across Europe. The platform provides real-time information on borders, travel restrictions, public health and safety measures such as physical distancing or the use of face masks, as well as other practical information for travelers. What is the name of the web platform? Is it A, Team Europe, B, Reopen EU, C, Schengen, or D, Next Generation EU? Okay, the first person was from UMY, Dinda Salsa. Dinda, what is your answer?
Reopen EU.
Are you sure?
Reopen EU. Yes.
Okay. Good, great. Congratulations.
Thank
And
you.
that is the end of the quiz. Congratulations to the winners. All right. We will be contacting you after this to send you your prizes. And now to wrap up today's discussion, please allow me to give a brief summary of our conversation today. And I would like to highlight 10 points. Firstly is that the COVID-19 pandemic is on all of our minds. The pandemic has accelerated globally, and the figures show this. Europe has relatively good news. They have seen a decline in the number of daily infections. The peak was in April, where there were 35,000 infected cases, and now they have around 5,000 infected cases, more or less, all across the European states. So from being top of the list, the EU has made tremendous progress in bringing down the peak. Number two is that the European states were unprepared at first and were taken by surprise by this pandemic. Now, the European states have adopted various measures to contain the virus by insisting on tracing and testing, imposing a lockdown on specific places that have a high rate of infection, as well as promoting a change of behavior by using masks and practicing social distancing. The most important task is to protect all citizens. The third point is that other measures is that a very large portion of the EU budget has been allocated for its member states to finance health facilities. More importantly, most of the European Union member states have shown solidarity with other member states that are hit the hardest by the pandemic by providing medical equipment and medical personnel assistance. The fourth point is that the top priority now is getting the vaccine, because without it, there is no sustainable resumption of life and economy. They are doing everything they can to obtain it. And right now, there are 2.7 billion euros of funds to pharmaceutical companies that have a promising idea for a vaccine nearing clinical trials. The vaccine is predicted to come in 12 to 18 months, and this is a global effort. It can't be a vaccine for your country alone. For the EU, once there is a vaccine available, their goal is to make sure that it is accessible for all countries all over the world to obtain and produce from the patent at home. And their goal is to try and get 2 billion people vaccinated by the end of next year. And the EU is spending around 10 billion euros for research, treatment, and vaccines. Point number 5 is that 600,000 EU citizens were repatriated from Indonesia, was around 20,000. And there was a good level of cooperation on this. For instance, Garuda was the only airline remaining with a direct link to Europe, and many thousands of people were able to come home because of them. And Indonesians stranded in Europe also could return to Indonesia the same way. Point number 6 is that the EU's border is reopening gradually. The internal border has been open for free travel, and the external border is being opened on a step-by-step basis. It remains open for scholars and researchers. And since the EU is the biggest and important tourist destination globally and is a major sector of the economy, the EU will gradually open its external border for tourism. Point number 7 is that in terms of economy, the latest forecast from the European Commission and the European Central Bank is that the contraction of the economy is about 8% this year, which is massive. Companies have become heavily indebted with no sales and demand, meaning all the job gains that the EU made from the financial crisis in 2009 are now set back. And youth unemployment is also forecasted to increase at the beginning of the third quarter of the year. And the EU's approach is to try and keep companies open and afloat while the crisis lasts. The EU is allowing its member states to provide financial support for the running costs, as well as subsidize payrolls of companies, not everyone, but those most affected, to avoid layoffs. And the resumption of economic activity in general must go on in order to compensate for the tremendous impacts that they are suffering. Point number 8 is what is clear is that the recovery plan will be a green plan. EU has to get its economy back on the road, but not forget about climate change. This is a strong green dimension, so-called Green Deal, into their rebound efforts. The goal is to be carbon neutral by the year 2050 for the whole of the European continent. And there is also a special recovery plan that the President of the European Commission has proposed. The plan has been called Next Generation EU with an additional 750 billion euros. Point number 9 is on the multilateral system. The EU must examine how the World Health Organization has functioned and performed, and the WHO cannot do its job on its own, but it is not the time to undermine the only global health organization that we have. And the last point is that disinformation can be deadly. Disinformation does not mean that we are fighting against the freedom of speech or the freedom of media, but instead we are fighting against state-sponsored entities or even states that can abuse our freedoms against us. And with that, wraps up my summary. And with that, I would like to give the floor back to Ambassador Piket for his closing remarks or any message that you have for the students.
Well, thanks very much indeed to FPCI, to Cindy as host of this meeting. And particularly thanks very much to all students in the 4 universities in Yogyakarta. It was a great pleasure to meet you this afternoon. And I do hope that we, in the future, we will have more opportunities to do so. Visit our website of the EU delegation in Indonesia for news about what we do, for your direct link to the big website of the EU in Brussels for updates of anything. It's very efficient, I can tell you that. So you can subscribe free of charge for any type of information that you would like to receive regularly. And my Twitter account, the Twitter account of the delegation, etc. You can all find it on our website. So do make use of that. And my last message to you is stay vigilant, stay self-disciplined, do this distancing and your mask and your hand washing. It's boring, but it is absolutely essential that everybody does that. You, me, everybody has to do their part in order to bring this pandemic under control in this country and to get back to something of normalcy for our society, for our economy, and for our private lives. So good luck with that, and thanks once again for this wonderful afternoon.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And with that, we have come to the end of our ambassadorial lecture today. Before we close, however, I would like to invite everyone for a virtual photo shoot. So if everybody could turn on their videos and smile at the camera, and we will take the picture. Are you ready to take the picture? All right. Okay.
Okay.
I'm curious.
Can you count down, Ray?
Okay. So in the count of 1, 2, and 3. One more time. Different smile, maybe. 1, 2. And one more time. Let's do a freestyle. 1, 2, and 3. Okay. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank
you.
Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you, Ambassador.
Have a nice day.
Have a nice day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you, ambassadors.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And
Makasih
also congrats for the
semuanya.
winner.
Bye.
Congratulations.
Nanti untuk alamatnya bisa langsung dikirimkan ke ketua chapter. Nanti ketua chapter yang akan kirim